Hey guys, as you can see from the intro there, this is about the new Grandmaster quest that's coming out. A behind the scenes video was just released about it. The TheScapeQuest, the Brink of Extinction. This isn't going to be a breakdown video as such, more just sort of a discussion about some of the points that have been brought up in the video. So let's get on into it.
Stunning new obsidian armour and an exclusive combat training area are just two of the rewards Mod Goya reveals as we look at the finale to the TheScapeQuest series. First though, how about a quick recap?
So straight off there he mentions a couple of the rewards. He says that about this obsidian armour, which they talk about later on in the video, which is kind of awesome looking armour. And on top of that they speak about this sort of this fight cauldron style minigame, which I assume is going to be a little bit like the fight caves and the fight kiln, and it's waves of monsters sort of thing. But it also leads me to believe that maybe doing something like the fight kiln might be a requirement for this, but I guess we'll find out at a later date.
This quest, obviously the Brink of Extinction, is a continuation of the Elder Kiln. One of the main story elements of that quest was that the Tsar, which is this sort of subterranean race, their offspring are not being born as sort of fully formed Tsar, and instead they're being born as Gar, which is a kind of undeveloped Tsar. And so they experimented in the first quest with taking the remains of their ancestors and fusing them with the Gar to try and create a way around this problem, and didn't really work out exactly as they'd hoped. So that was one of the main story threads we wanted to return to and resolve with this quest. We have the Tsar, which is this warrior race, and the Gar, and the two don't really have a very harmonious relationship, and the Tsar don't really look very kindly on the Gar, they kind of just throw them in the fight pits. We wanted to kind of try and resolve that and bring things to a more kind of stable place with those two races. And also look at the Tok'ar who were introduced in that first quest, maybe reveal a bit more about them, their motivations, and what it is that they're up to as well.
In this first little section of the video, they're just talking about the storyline that's already occurred, so in the Elder Kiln quest. Not so much from the TheScapeQuest quest, because that was just sort of a small, singular, standalone quest. But they introduced the characters, the Garl in the Elder Kiln quest, and the Tok'ar characters, which are the characters that are actually inside the kiln. They're like the much stronger ones that are more true to their nature than the Tazar. And the Garl are basically these non-true Tazar that are born without memories of their ancestors, which normal Tazars are. One little extra note is if you note the frame that I've frozen it on, then it looks like a celebration scene almost, so it makes me think that maybe they're celebrating getting rid of the Garl or the Tok'ar for some period of time, but I guess we'll just find out when we play through the quest.
The main characters that we have in the quest are those that were introduced in the Elder Kiln. We have Tok'ar Hok, who features in the Fight Kiln content, and he takes a surprising role in this quest, which I think is, for me, like one of the main appeals of it from a story point of view. And we have Garl Zox, who was a character created in the Elder Kiln quest. He came into being in that quest, and again he takes quite a kind of key role in this. Probably my favourite character because he's very interesting, he's got a lot going on, he's got his own kind of agenda which is quite different from that of the other characters. So it's mostly established characters, but we take them in, I think, new directions with this quest, and we break new ground with them, so it's quite exciting.
So once again they're just talking about the characters involved and what are going to be involved this time round. So the character that introduces you to the Fight Kiln is apparently going to play quite a large role, which I kind of like him. He seems like a cool character, although he does rip apart your fire cape, which made me a little bit angry the first time because it was my only one at the first time I did it, but I obviously gained a few back. So that should be interesting, and introduces more thought of the storyline once again that they're going to be getting into. And if you listen up in just a second, they're going to be talking about the general requirements you're going to need for the quest.
It's a members quest, Grandmaster level, so players are going to need a high level mining, smithing and defence to take the quest. So I think if they've got those skills kind of already high, it's a good reason to push them up a little more, aim for the 80 mark, and then you can play the quest. The idea was that we wanted to offer players a challenging, mostly combat oriented quest. Obviously that's the sort of tradition of the TheScapeQuest, they're mostly combat focused. This has other elements to it, there are puzzle mechanics as well, but the focus is on that kind of diverse, high level combat challenge. The first we've released since the evolution of combat. So the idea is that players are going to have to use a lot of the different features in that combat system to really succeed in the fights and take quite a strategic approach to the combat. And that's in addition to obviously resolving that story, bring things to a natural close there, and for those players who've committed and engaged in that story, we give them a sort of satisfying narrative conclusion.
So what they've said there is that it's going to be a mining requirement of around 80. Like you said, get your levels up to 80 and that should be enough for the quest. So I assume they might be below 80, but they're just recommending get them up to 80. But on the other hand, it could mean that they might be over 80, so it might be worth training them a bit higher. Like me personally, I've only actually got 81 mining. But this is the highest mining requirement, I think, that any quest has ever had, because I believe Ritual of the Marjarat had a was it 77 mining requirement? I think I might have boosted mine at the time because it wasn't high enough. And also they're talking about a lot about there's going to be a lot of combat involved in the quest, which is kind of interesting, and they're saying it's based on some of the abilities that are specific to the evolution of combat, so you might need things like resonance to avoid massive amounts of damage, maybe things like that. So it should be interesting to see what the fights are like.
The main quest reward is obsidian armor. Players are going to be able to smith their own obsidian armor once they've completed the quest. The armor is really cool. It's sort of this SAR-themed obsidian armor set. It's got this kind of great sort of obsidian-y, metallic-y kind of sheen to it, little lava-y kind of highlights in there, sort of reflecting the theme of the SAR, but looking appropriate for, the player character avatar as well. We've got one for each basic combat class, so if you're a ranger, a melee fighter, or a mage, there's one to suit your basic combat style and your approach to combat. One of the other main draws is going to be the Fight Cauldron, which is a combat mini-game you get to access once you've completed the quest. So once you've done it, you've got that whole other repeatable piece of content you can go back to again and again, use your obsidian armor, all that new combat stuff, and use the new combat system there really effectively, really fully. So Elder Kiln's a great quest, but I think I dare say this is probably an improvement on that in terms of gameplay, in terms of story, in terms of characterization. Really exciting bit of content. Really strong ending in particular. I'm a big fan of the ending. And the way that's resolved, it's a really satisfying sort of narrative payoff. So I think it offers a lot of combat. There's the puzzles, there's the great rewards, and there's a great story. So I think it's the complete package, really.
The rewards here sound really quite amazing. So let's take a look at these armor stats and sort of think how good they are in comparison to current armor stats in game. If you want to be able to see these images pretty well, then you might want to turn your video onto HD and put it into full screen, because otherwise you might not actually be able to see the stats specifically. So besides the fact that they actually all look pretty awesome, you can see that their life point boost is crazy. Like the ranged and melee versions have 7,440 life point boosts, which is crazy. When you compare that to next sets, a whole next set, which includes the gloves and boots, will have 4,800. So already we're over 2,500 life points boost better. Obviously there's the thing to take into account, the fact that this is the Tok'ar Kal, which has a small life point boost, and they have shields. But then again, the best shields in the game at the moment only boost about 1,000 life points. So that's a pretty nice chunk of extra life point boost we're going to get there. So I think this is going to be high-end armor. Another thing to note is that the critical hit bonus. Now, although I saw that the melee one had quite a high critical hit bonus, I added up all the various items, so including the Tok'ar Kal and the Tokkul Zo, and also the Amulet of Fury. Unfortunately, those all added up to the same critical hit bonus, so the armor doesn't have a critical hit bonus, which a bit of a shame really, but it's kind of to be expected. On top of that, it's kind of interesting to note the fact that they all have the same item pieces except the helm. So this means that it kind of acts like Void, I assume. So the actual pieces maybe aren't specific to a certain combat style, but then when you put the helm on, it actually is specific to that combat style. So that's kind of cool. So that might save you inventory slots if you're hybriding. Also, one thing to note is the magic setup seems to have 220 life point bonus more than the other setups. So, and if you look at it, the leg slot is actually slightly different from the other two. So whether that's a different piece of obsidian equipment, or it's just like an alternate, so you sacrifice armor for life point bonus, but it's kind of an interesting thing to note. In terms of armor, the armor stats seem to match pretty much exactly what the life point bonus is, so that's already that's sort of actually kind of only equal to next set, so it seems to be more of a life point bonusing piece of equipment rather than an armor piece of equipment. So whether you're willing to sacrifice a little bit of extra armor for more life points, I think that's kind of interesting. So in general, these sets look pretty insane, and I'm kind of looking forward to trying this out. In terms of acquiring them, I suppose there's going to be two ways. Either they're going to be really easy to obtain and untradeable, so you're basically going to have to complete the quest, then get the items, or they're going to be maybe a rare drop from this Fight Cauldron thing they've been talking about, and then it's kind of like it's tradable, but it's going to have a high value. So be interesting to see how that works out, because it's the first time we've really seen proper high-end gear that's been untradeable, if that is the case. So that'll be an interesting point. So this is the end of the general talk about the new quest that's coming out. So in all, it looks pretty insane. I'm really quite looking forward to this quest. I hope I can do it. I hope that my stats aren't too low and that I'm not very good at, and that I'm good at the combat, so I can actually complete the quest and bring you some interesting guides on it. I'm just going to leave the last little bit of the behind the scenes to play out, and it's got some interesting content that I know some people have been waiting quite a long time for.
Next week, player-owned ports. Yes, player-owned ports.
So there you go, player imports, one thing that some people have been waiting a really long time for. Unfortunately, I don't think my construction level is actually high enough to engage with that content, but it's going to be pretty cool nonetheless, so that'll be next week's behind the scenes video. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and that it was the sort of thing that you'd actually like to see more often on my channel maybe. But thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.